I mean, that, like, how does that not, like, piss you the hell off?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say the heartless conservative thing now. If the guy doesn't like a job, can he find another job?
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Michael Yaffee is a conservative talk radio host on one of the stations that we air on. You can hear him in the mornings, and he's taking some time this evening. Remember that we're pre-taping since we're going to be going down to Bessemer to make house calls with RWDSU this weekend. So he's actually, and we've had a lot of technical difficulties. It is currently storming, and the power went out. While we were talking to somebody, we were really worried that we lost like the first hour of the show. But luckily, we only ended up losing the 10 minutes that it took to get back going. So it's a little bit later than he expected to join us. So thanks for your time, Yaffee. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
So first things first, we're working people in Alabama, and, this isn't our jobs. We don't get paid to do this. We're working people in Alabama with a small platform trying to advocate for working people, particularly in Alabama and the South. So the miners' strike in Brookwood, in our backyard, we probably haven't spent more time on a single other story than that. But no other talk radio host in the state seems to care, like, at all about these workers, many of whom actually used to be reliable Republicans. We spoke earlier in the program about Braxton being on the testifying before the U.S. Senate Budget Committee and refusing to shake Tommy Tuberville's hand because of Tommy Tuberville's statements before him, and because of his lack of any kind of support for the strikers as we're going on nearly a year on this strike. And Braxton used to vote reliably Republican. This is a reliable Republican voter who refused to shake the junior senator from Alabama's hand after testifying in D.C. I walked the picket line with people wearing Trump hats at the beginning of the strike, though I think that we're seeing less of that among them now. Why is that? Why do conservatives, Republicans, talk radio hosts, politicians, why do they not care?
Well, I will say this, in terms of me personally, you know how I feel about unions in general, so I tend to be a little more libertarian than the Trumpian populist conservative. Now, I will say I'm actually kind of surprised that they don't get more support from Trump, from the Trump-like Republicans. I really don't have a good answer for that, other than that it's just one of those things where they're both trying to negotiate, and nothing's really changed. You have one side, both sides kind of stuck their heels in. But I wouldn't be surprised. The only thing I can think of is, I know that the union has had strong support from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So anytime you get that, there's that. Oops, sorry about that. Anytime you get that, there's like a political bent to all of this that can create some divisions. So maybe that's it. But I would say the Republican Party under Trump has changed a little bit and is probably more pro-union than even I am.
Well, the support from Bernie Sanders and Senator Warren came very late. And actually there was because of the nature of the membership of the union. I mean, I know some details that I'm not going to get into specifically, but let's just say there was a certain amount of resistance to accepting their support. And I talked to from the leadership of the union. There was a certain amount of resistance, and we'll leave it at that, to accepting support from Senator Bernie Sanders. And I spoke to people, the rank and file, who were similarly resistant at the beginning of the strike, and they were expecting their churches, their local politicians, their state reps, their state senators, Donald Trump. They expected these people to come out and support them. And basically, when they didn't, and Bernie Sanders and other people on the left, quote unquote, or other Democrats were still there saying, I'm still here to support you, then they accepted. But it was only after nobody else did.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wish I had a better answer. I mean, what do you think? Because, well, like I said, in terms of me personally, I can be a bad gauge for this because in economics, I tend to be much more libertarian than maybe even Trump is. Why the Trump-like Republicans have not been out supporting them, I really don't know.
Well, but I don't
I
even
really don't have a
understand.
good answer.
Well, I'll tell you my thoughts in just a second, but I want to drill down on the libertarian bit because I don't even understand. I don't understand, frankly, why that wouldn't make you a bigger supporter of unions, because it's not like the government. You know, we're in a right to rec state. You can be a member or you can be in a workplace, and it is illegal for workers to bargain for a representation fee to be in their contract. The government has come in, which I think is an anti-libertarian thing, but the government has come in and said to workers and to the employer, no, you can't put this clause in your contract that you agree to privately. I think that's anti-libertarian. That's quote unquote right to work laws. So these people are members of the union, by their own choice, their own individual choice. They are on strike by their own individual choice. But the thing that wasn't their individual choice was the way that this contract was forced on them by these bankruptcy laws, which is exactly what the hearing was about today, was the bankruptcy laws that allowed these international private equity firms to come in and buy this company that the owners had allowed to go bankrupt, allow the CEO and the board of directors to stay the same, but allowed them to completely renege on all of their obligations to the community. They were able to, they were not obligated to bring back a single worker. They were not obligated to, they were not obligated to, pay for retiree pensions or health care that the company had previously agreed to. All of these obligations were totally gone because of the bankruptcy law that the government, again, has said that companies can just forego all of these obligations. That's not a libertarian type thing. That's what the hearing was about today. And so to save the company from bankruptcy, and they accepted huge pay cuts, $6 an hour pay cuts voluntarily, again, cuts to their health care, cuts to their pensions, all of these things to save the company. And then the company is saying, we're not even going to keep up with inflation with this contract. After you've given us $1.1 billion, there was $1.1 billion in savings if over the course of this 5 years that they've had this contract, meaning that if they had just kept up with inflation from the last contract, they would have paid out more $1.1 billion more than they did. So why as a libertarian, why would that preclude you from saying that, yeah, I support these rural Alabama workers over international private equity firms?
Well, it's not necessarily that it would preclude me from supporting the workers over private equity firms. And you're talking a lot about bankruptcy law. And I have to admit, I'm not an expert on bankruptcy law. I know it does change things when companies declare bankruptcy or private equity firms come in. Usually from a libertarian perspective, it's more that the companies have a right as well. You know, you're talking it to it as the union has a right, and they do have a certain rights, as you were kind of saying, and they can go on strike, and they are going on strike. But usually libertarians kind of look at it from a private business standpoint as well, and say that private business has a right to do what they want, not hire them back, do things.
Yeah, but I'm not even talking about their right, quote unquote. I mean, I support the right of a Nazi to speak. But that doesn't mean that I agree with it. That doesn't mean that I have to be on the sideline. You can say the company has a right to do this or that, and I would probably say that they shouldn't have that right, but we can even stipulate that, and you could still say what these international private equity firms are doing to this Alabama community, stealing $1.1 billion, that is not okay, and we should be putting public pressure on this company, or we should be at least verbally supporting these workers.
Gotcha. And that's an interesting point when you talk about what they have a right versus a responsibility. And there are definitely big companies that I believe have rights to do things that I disagree with. Big tech is one we could talk about as well. I think a lot of it here, when you talk about why Republicans don't support it, maybe there is some confusion in some of the bankruptcy laws and how a lot of this works, and not as people are as informed as you are on some of that kind of stuff. I think a lot of it, though, really is there's just some conservatives that are still very wary of unions. And when you have a union trying to do something like this together as a union, it just kind of makes them back up a little bit. But I think there's also something you could be say, which you're right, where a lot of especially Trumpian Republicans, they're not going to be happy with these private equity firms and what they're doing. I think that's where a lot of the Trump support came from. And like I said, I'm a little bit surprised that they have not gotten more support from like a Trump thing. And there might be, and that's what I was curious what you were thinking as well. What do you think the reason is?
Well, so here's what I think, that the difference between this and so many other conservative culture war stories, quote unquote, is that the stakes are real. I mean, I think that the stakes are real, and there will be material benefits for working people, and it will cost bosses. And I think that's the difference. And because the story has international private equity firms, coastal elites, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, which owns the majority stake in Warrior Met, he's a big Democratic donor. He's going around talking about climate change and whatever the hell. I mean, so we've got that angle. We can. I don't care how you do it, frankly. You can come at it from that angle. You've got the free speech angle, where unlike so many of these free speech stories where we're talking about private companies that are deciding to platform or not platform this person, or individual actors deciding that they do or don't want to be associated with this person, unlike in those cases, we've actually got the government, the state of Alabama, saying to these workers that you cannot picket, that you cannot, that no more than right now no more than two people can be on the picket line in Brookwood at one time. Almost immediately after the strike began, they limited it to 10, and then to like 11, and then to 6. Then they banned it outright for like 2 or 3 months. Picketing was banned in Brookwood, and now they're allowing them to. So you've got like actual legitimate, in my view and in the view of the union, First Amendment violations by the state of Alabama. And, and you've got a cultural sensitivity here, because you've got coal miners. And like I said, you had a reliable Republican voter refuse to shake a Republican U.S. senator's hand. So you've got the cultural angle. And I think that, I remember you tweeting a couple of weeks ago or something that it was a quote-unquote serious problem that Minnie Mouse is for 1 month at one Disney location halfway across the world in France wearing a pantsuit. I think that the difference here between Minnie Mouse wearing a pantsuit at one location for 1 month halfway across the world and coal miners in Alabama is that the stakes are real, is that there's actually going to be a material difference in people's lives. And I think that the conservative ideology is one that is of by and for corporate power.
That's an interesting point. I'm hearing music in the background, so I don't know if it's coming on your end or if that's from my end. But I think that is when I talked about the Minnie Mouse thing, it was one of those things where I was like, that's more of like, I only think it's a serious thing in terms of that specific thing. Maybe it's not serious in and of itself, but overall, in terms of all these things in the culture, I do think drip, drip, drip eventually in a big time thing that can affect the culture. And when you're talking about this situation, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there are real stakes. And like I said, in terms of not getting Republican support, I really think it's frankly, there's just a lot of conservatives and a lot of Republicans that are just skeptical of unions. And when unions talk about something against private companies, that makes them put their guard up. And that is changing, though. I tend to be kind of an outlier on some of that stuff. Because of Trump, the Republican Party is transforming, and maybe you'll see a change here.
Hey, I wanted to jump in on that point right there because, I've also heard that coming from Republican circles the last few years. And we heard it from, liberal circles as well, that Trump was appealing to the working class. even though the demographics of his supporters are about the same as Mitt Romney and John McCain's, honestly. It's your standard Republican base. But, there's certainly been some excitement that certain segments of the working class had with Trump and the whole Trump phenomenon. And we've seen Marco Rubio and other Republicans talk about being pro-worker or being a working, more or less trying to shape the image of the Republican Party to be more friendly to working class folks. I would say unsaid there is a certain type of working class folk, primarily white ones. But that aside, there has been this rhetoric of Republicans posturing towards working class people and working class issues, but the evidence remains to be seen. And I think this is just, one of many examples, but this is a very clear example where here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity to say, hey, yeah, we're pro-worker. In fact, these are coal miners, which, I've seen plenty of Republicans talk about coal miners on the campaign trail. We've seen coal miners being used in political ads, and I agree with you, Jacob. To me, it seems as if it's one thing to support folks in the abstract, to say, well, we support coal miner jobs because we're against climate regulations. But when you actually have people on the ground where it is real, well, no, that's when it's time to back away or pretend that, you're not involved there. You shouldn't have a perspective there. And what you're speaking to, I think, is how politics, as we understand it, as, if you just say politics to folks, what tends to be brought up is the spectacle of arguing back and forth, mostly about cultural type issues.
About whether or not Minnie Mouse should wear pants.
Yeah, and it's very much media driven. It's all about getting clicks and getting attention, and it's pretty divorced from real world issues. And I think part of that's because we sort of all taken the assumption that real world issues can't be addressed by politics anymore. Maybe that's just me, but that's sort of the vibe I get from it. But I agree. I think at the end of the day, when you have a contradiction that's exposed there between the rhetoric and the actions, and it's easy to talk about supporting workers in the abstract, but when workers are on the picket line, they need support. When workers are seeing their wages cut, when they're seeing their benefits cut, those you can't get any more real than that. That's how you eat. That's how you feed your family. That's how you retire in dignity. So all that to say, for all the talk about working class posturing coming from Republican circles, and I hate the way populism, I think, is kind of overused, but I don't see it. I don't see it beyond culture and appealing to, cultural conservatism, which, yes, does have it, segments of support among the working class, just like it does all classes. So yeah, I don't see it. I really don't see it. If there's a point in time where Republicans can come out and say, here's how we are supporting working class people who have to sell their labor in exchange for wages, and who cannot live off stocks and cannot live off rents and profits, I'd love to see it. I mean, I haven't seen it in my lifetime.
So my only response to that is a lot of it just has to do with approaches. For one, you were talking about the abstract. Well, there were issues that even Republicans here in Alabama were disagreeing with Republicans in the legislature that was beyond abstract and was very real, and had to do with vaccine mandates. And I think Trump got a lot of support from some working class. And the reason why it said that is because in the 2016 election, he was able to kind of break through that blue wall. Now, a lot of it had to do with Hillary Clinton being a bad candidate, I think. A lot of that also, I think, had to do with what you said, culture issues. While it seems abstract, seems media driven, I think it actually, a lot of workers do care about that, because we live in the culture and how things work in the culture. Now, when you're talking about economic issues, I think it's like just different approaches. Your approach is more union based, collective bargaining based, supporting the worker in that regard, where Trump's approach was more trade policy or something like that, where you have fair trade and going after things like that. So it's sort of, I mean, we can kind of believe in the worst intentions of each side. And I totally understand that. I mean, unfortunately, that can be politics. But a lot of it really is just a different approach of how we deal with things. My approach is what's best for the worker is an overall thriving economy where if one company treats them bad, they have an ability to go to another company and get a job. And people are competing for jobs and companies are competing for labor. And the best way to do that is through a very free market economic system. So you might disagree with that, and that's fine. That's where politics gets disruptive. But in terms of supporting the worker, I believe that supports the worker, where you believe your approach supports workers in a different way. And that's, I think, where a lot of the disagreement is. And in terms of like climate change policy, like you said, that's another thing where I think it does affect the worker, and the worker sees it in their job and see what's going on in the future and jobs being lost. And that's why they might go Republican. But overall, I do understand what you're saying, that it does kind of surprise me that maybe more Republicans don't support something like this. And overall, I'm not necessarily sure, other than maybe they just don't support the approach because they're wary of unions in general, because unions traditionally in the past 20, 30 years have been pretty pro-Democrat.
I mean, not the UMWA, not the UMWA. They didn't even endorse Joe Biden in the last election. I mean, this is not like, even a lot of the building trades unions are, they will endorse the Democratic candidate for president, but the UMWA hasn't. They have been for a long time silent on the national stage as far as endorsements. They endorse Joe Manchin every year, but that's that's basically it. And so it's very frustrating to me because did you watch the hearing today?
No, I did not. I was looking up news reports on it. I did see Tuberville, and I did see some of what Tuberville said in the hearing, and Tuberville was making the point that I was kind of going back to earlier, that he seems more skeptical because Warren and Sanders are involved and feels like they're tipping the scales towards the union. And it kind of goes back to his approach with unions. And he just doesn't seem like a senator who is going to be in a rush to support a union on anything.
Yeah,
it's just kind of the way it is.
That's extremely frustrating to me because I'm not somebody that I only support people that are ideologically aligned with me. I support working people making their lives better. And like I said, I marched. I was on the picket line at the beginning of the strike with people in Trump hats, right? Like, I'm not, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a conservative, but
right.
This guy, I believe. I see him as my brother, and I believe that he sees me as his brother. And listening to Braxton, another guy that I've had a lot of conversations with, testify about the way that this company has affected his life. Before the bankruptcy contract in 2016, he didn't have to work 6 to 10 day weeks. He didn't have to work 10 to 12 hour days. He was able to spend time with his family, and many people, their partners did not have to work. Their partners were able to stay at home while they went to work, and they were both able to spend time with their families. And he talked about how most of the people's spouses have since the contract. I mean, we're talking about a $6 an hour pay cut. That's like a mortgage payment, $6 an hour. And he was talking about how a lot of the people, their spouses had to take jobs. And when you're talking about working 6 to 7 day weeks, 10 to 12 hours a day, you're talking about just basically sponsoring your family. You're getting up, you're going to work, you're coming home, and you're going to sleep so that your family can live. And he talked about how it would break your heart how many times his kid would ask why wasn't he at her ball game? And he would say, I had to work or I had to sleep. And before that, Tommy Tuberville had the gall to talk about how these people, their average wage is $97,000 a year. He had the gall to say that knowing that these people, to get $97,000 a year, they were working 6 to 7 day weeks. They were working 10 to 12 hours a day. And he said that less than 24 hours after he told the media that he opposed a stock trading ban because he felt like that would disincentivize people from coming to work in D.C. He doesn't think, for special important people like him, that $200,000 a year in taxpayer money is enough. But he thinks for coal miners in Brookwood, Alabama, $97,000 is maybe even too much. I mean, that, like, how does that not, like, piss you the hell off?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say the heartless conservative thing now. If the guy doesn't like a job, can he find another job?
Of course not. That's the best job in the area. That's the only, otherwise you're looking at like working at a grocery store or something. But the only reason that the company is able to do that is because they are owned by trillion-dollar international private equity firms.
So what would be your solution here? And what exactly did you want Tuberville, other than showing like a support of outspoken support, specifically government policy? What government policy would you like to change here?
So I think that, of course, I think it's very frustrating to me when I hear people talk about how I don't want to weigh in on these private negotiations because that's between the workers and the company, because we know that that's BS. That conservatives and politicians, Democrats and Republicans, comment on the private functions of corporations all the time. All the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All the time. We know that that's bogus, frankly, and that's the nice way to say it. So I think at the very least, we should be able to expect from people who are illegitimately exploiting our communities that our representatives will at least say, that's bad. That's like really bad that these coastal elites are able to rip $1.1 billion from one small community. I think that that's like the bare minimum. But as far as government policy, we were the whole hearing was basically centered around bankruptcy law and how it's broken because this company was able to totally sever all of their obligations to the workers and to the community through bankruptcy. And I don't think they should have been able to do that. I don't think that they should have been able to totally to get rid of their entire workforce. They were all let go. And then it was on the company whether or not they could hire them back. Despite the fact that the company and the workers had both ratified a contract saying, I'm going to hire you and it's going to be under these conditions and you can expect this pay and these conditions and these health benefits, these retirements. All of that was totally gone. And the same CEO was able to come back and the same board of directors was able to come back. They got raises. I think that bankruptcy law should not allow people to totally get rid of all of their obligations to their employers. I think that that's one thing that we can do.
Yeah, and there might be some reforms that are needed in bankruptcy law. I can't really argue with that. In terms of this specific case, you talk about it. I mean, the purpose of bankruptcy law is because they try to get out of some of those contracts and some of those liabilities. It's the whole point. But you had made the point that they got out of it, but then they went back and hired the same board of directors and all of that stuff and paid them and not the workers. Mm-hmm. On the surface, yeah, you're right. That doesn't seem fair. Maybe there are some reforms there. I have to admit, I would have to do a little bit more research on the specifics of bankruptcy law before I can take a firm stance on that one. I will have to admit that, but I totally get your point there.
Jacob, I just wanted to weigh in real quick on that because I think ultimately it just boils down to whose side are you on, and in this case, I think it would be. It seems to me that at least with folks like Senator Tuberville all the way down to, Alabama legislators and local politicians there, that they would be more concerned of alienating Warrior Met Coal and the venture capitalists behind them, who are, of course, very wealthy and powerful and influential. They're more concerned about keeping those folks on their side as opposed to the, 2,000 or so miners. 1,100 miners on strike and their families. And it's really a shame because, as you pointed out, that's money that was in this community
Right.
that has been slowly drained out. That's money that could be in that community and could be, circulated in that economy. That would be economic growth.
Yeah,
If these
we're
folks had those wages, they would be spending it locally. That would create more jobs and so forth. So,
$1.1 billion in Brookwood over 5 years. Like that's
a ton.
And instead of that $1.1 billion providing economic growth in Brookwood, it's sitting in a bank in New York. Like that's not a good use of resources, and I don't think that's the fair allocation of like who does the work, because these people were able to swoop in from New York. Like Cecil said the international president of the UMWA, he said in the hearing, these people don't know what color the coal is, and they're able to, they didn't find the mine, they didn't mine the coal, they don't transport the coal, but somehow they own the mine, and they're able to take all this money out of Brookwood. I can't, It's incredibly frustrating, and the only reason that they're able to do that is because they own these trillions of dollars. Like the playing field is simply not fair. It's totally stacked in favor of the company.
And I think
to me.
Senator Tuberville's comments are designed to obscure exactly what you just said. I think 100% that is what he was testifying to today, was to obscure just those basic facts about what's really happening.
The attorneys of Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to represent working people in Alabama and across the Southeast. They have over 100 years of experience representing injured workers in workers' compensation, personal injury, and disability claims. Let their attorneys help you when you get injured on the job. You can find them at www.mtandj.com or 855-617-9333. Let Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs help you when you get injured on the job. Again, the website is www.mtandj.com or the phone number 855-617-9333. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms.